Welcome and thank you for joining today. Our focus in this session is assessment under the new standards for RTOs. So when I first thought about this session, I actually had no idea how big it is. And as I waded through the standards in quality area 1, I realised that I just can't cover this topic in 60 minutes. So as I looked at all of those steps involved, like the assessment process from developing and validating, conducting assessment events, marking, giving feedback, moderating and validating all of these results, and that continuous improvement process, my head was spinning. And that was without even thinking about RPL or credit transfer. So I sort of had a quick chat to myself and made a decision. This topic is too big for one session. So today I'll give an overview of the standards 1.3 and 1.4, and I'm going to leave the rest for another day. So I hope everybody's happy with that. So the standards for RTOs 2025 are turning up the heat on assessment. We're moving beyond the days of, tick the box and hope for the best. Assessment is no longer just about paperwork. It's about proof that our learners can actually do the job, not just talk about it. High quality assessment is what shows the world our graduates are job ready, our assessors are compliant and fair, and our systems are built on integrity, and not just those clever templates that we see. The new standards call for a system level approach. This is to our processes, our tools, and the validation that actually work together. So in short, it's about creating assessment that stands up to scrutiny from ASQA, from industry, and from our own conscience. So in the past, assessment compliance often meant making sure the right boxes were ticked and the right forms were filled, and making sure they were somewhere safe. It was more about paper trails than proof of learning. So the 2025 standards flip that thinking. The spotlight now is on quality assurance and self-assurance. In other words, being able to show that what we do actually works. So under these standards, the expectations for assessment have had a serious upgrade. It's no longer about showing compliance once a year and filing that evidence away. It's about proving quality every day. Where we used to focus on producing evidence of compliance and audit, we now have to demonstrate ongoing quality and integrity in everything that we do. Validation is no longer a once-a-year chore. It's now structured, risk-based process that actually helps identify what's working and what's not. And off-the-shelf assessment tools won't cut it anymore. RTOs are expected to use contextualised tools that mirror real work practice. And perhaps the biggest shift of all, assessment quality is now a shared responsibility. It's not just on the shoulders of the individual assessors. It's built into the organisation of systems, their culture, and their leadership. So in short, the focus has shifted from what's on paper to what's happening in practice. Excuse me. Quality assessment isn't something you prepare for, it's something you live, you measure, and you continuously improve. So what does that look like in practice? RTOs now need to show evidence of quality, not just compliance. Demonstrate that assessment tools, processes, and outcomes all line up with the training product. Review and validate regularly, not just because your calendar says so, but to catch risks and make things better. And of course, keep industry in the loop so your assessment actually reflects the job that's being done today, not 5 years ago. This shift fits perfectly in with ASQA's 2025 model, a move towards confidence through transparency, reflection, and good old-fashioned professional pride. So at its core, the whole point of assessment is simple. It's to prove a learner's competent, that they can actually do the job to the required standards and not just, talk a good game. But when assessment isn't up to scratch, things can unravel pretty quickly. And here's what's at stake. Learners might walk away with qualifications they haven't fully earned. Employers lose faith in the VET system and start to sidestep our graduates. Regulators begin to wonder if the RTO really knows what it's doing. And the worst one, and this is about safety and compliance risks. These can pop up when our graduates hit the workplace without the skills that they're meant to have. If assessment quality slips, everybody feels that the student, the employer, and particularly the reputation of your RTO. So high quality assessment system doesn't just fall into place. It's something that's carefully designed, tested, reviewed, and continuously improved over time. So building smarter assessment systems is really about moving away from relying on individual assessors or quick fixes. Instead, it's about creating a structured, well-documented, evidence-based approach that ensures consistency and quality across the board. Under Standard 1.1, every RTO needs to be able to show that its assessment system is what we're calling fit for purpose and aligns with the training product. So that means the system has to be intentionally built to produce reliable, consistent assessment judgments and to fully comply with the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence. And it's not about luck or guesswork. It's about design, intent, and in continuous improvement. Excuse me. So an assessment system is basically like your engine room behind quality assessment. It's a combination of policies, procedures, tools, resources, and your day-to-day practice that keeps everything running smoothly and ensures that those assessments are fair and consistent across the whole organisation. So it usually includes things like your RTO assessment policies and procedures, your evidence, your assessment plans, your contextualised tools and instruments, assessor guidelines with clear benchmarks, and systems for validation, moderation, and of course, our record management and reporting. It also covers professional development for assessors, so everyone stays skilled and confident in applying the standards. ASQA describes an assessment system as the framework that makes sure that assessment is valid, reliable, flexible, and fair. And when it's well designed, it delivers consistent results, no matter how many assessors, campuses, or cohorts are involved. So when designing or reviewing an assessment system, RTOs should think about a few key things to make sure it's practical, relevant, and compliant. So, of course, first is make sure everything lines up with the training product requirements. Each unit of competence should clearly be mapped to the assessment tasks, the evidence requirements, and show exactly how every performance criterion and knowledge evidence item is being covered. Using mapping tools makes that alignment easy to see and defend. And next, we need to check the relevance to industry practice. Talk to industry representatives and make sure assessment tasks still reflect real workplace expectations, tools, and technology. And then, of course, we'll need to update our case studies and our scenarios regularly so that they can stay current and meaningful. So there's a real need to get a good balance between theory and practice. Learners should be able to show both what they know and what they can do, and with plenty of opportunities to apply their knowledge in realistic settings. So here are some key pieces of evidence that ASQA or any validator will expect to see. So we should have meaningful mapping documents that clearly shows how every assessment task aligns with the unit requirements. And we also need to factor in foundation skills. We need to show how we're assessing what is actually in that training product. We need to have version control and some sort of register so that we know that we can keep track of which version each tool is the most current one, who updated it, and when. It's simple but powerful for maintaining system integrity. We also need pre-use records, evidence that the tools were checked before being used with learners. So these reviews should show the date, who completed it, and the outcome, like any changes made or feedback received. Then there are industry consultation notes. These confirm that the tasks we're using are realistic, relevant to the actual workplace, and not just theory-based or, they could even be outdated. Validation reports and continuous improvement logs are another key piece. They should review how assessments are working in practice and take key action when issues are identified. And then your professional development records for assessors, showing they're maintaining their skills, staying current in industry trends, and up to date with their training package. All of these come together to form a clear picture that the RTO assessment system is current, consistent, and credible, and that quality isn't just written into a policy, it's visible in practice. So the outcome standards ask RTOs to show that their systems generally work and that training and assessment are relevant, current, and producing job-ready learners. They also promote self-assurance, meaning we don't wait for ASQA to find issues. We monitor, review, and improve our own systems continuously. In short, outcome standards are about quality in action, making sure every learner's achievement reflects the real competence and every qualification stands up to scrutiny. So according to ASQA's practice guide assessment, there are two big clauses in the standards that do the heavy lifting when it comes to quality. Standard 1.3, it's all about having a fit-for-purpose assessment system. That's meaning your tools and your processes actually line up with the training product, reflect real work, and reviewed before you use them, and not just after something goes wrong. And then we've got standard 1.4, and that takes care of the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence, the famous 4x4. So in plain English, assessment must be fair, flexible, valid, and reliable, and the evidence must be sufficient, authentic, current, and valid. We all know this. Together, these two clauses form the background or the backbone of quality assessment. If 1.3 is about designing it right, 1.4 is about doing it right. And each of these standards reinforce that quality must be visible in how RTOs design, conduct, and review assessment. So let's have a little look at standard 1.3. It's all about having a fit-for-purpose assessment system. So if your RTO delivers units that lead to licensing or registration outcomes, your assessment tools must not only meet the training package requirements, but they must also satisfy any licensing authorities' specification. Like if the unit of competence contributes to a builder's license, then the evidence must demonstrate that that candidate meets all of the relevant competency and regulatory requirements. Okay, so I think 1.3 is a lot about how we map. So let's talk about mapping, because it's one of the simplest tools we can use, but it's one of the easiest to overlook. So mapping isn't just about ticking off the performance criteria. It's about showing a clear connection between what's being assessed and what the unit of competence actually requires. So in other words, it's our evidence trail that links the training package to our assessment tools. So a good mapping document should be something that anyone, no matter whether they're a new assessor, a validator, an auditor, can pick up and understand straight away. So they should be able to see what's being assessed, where it's assessed, and how it's assessed, and then what evidence is being collected. And it shouldn't take a detective to find out this information. So we talk about easy to use mapping, and what we mean here is really clear, consistent, and complete. It should cover, as we said, the whole unit of competence, not just the elements and the performance criteria. It also includes the knowledge evidence, the performance evidence, and the foundation skills, and it must meet those assessment conditions. So each one needs to be shown somewhere in the mapping so we can demonstrate full coverage. So good mapping documents should make this connection obvious, and it needs to show which tasks cover which parts of the unit. Every question, every practical activity or project should clearly link to the elements and performance criteria. Where the performance and knowledge evidence are assessed, so we can see what learners can do and what they know. And then how those foundation skills and assessment conditions are built in. You know, things like communication, teamwork, or the use of workplace documents. And then, of course, a really important factor is where assessor guides and marking benchmarks lie, showing consistency and reliability across our assessors. And of course, any contextualisation or reasonable adjustment notes, evidence that the tool's been tailored for the learner group without lowering that standard. So in short, your mapping should tell the full story of competence, clearly, simply, and in one place. So someone can pick it up and instantly see how each requirement is covered. You've nailed it. So one of the key expectations on the standard for 1.3 is that assessment tools are reviewed before they're used to make sure they're fit for purpose, they're relevant to the context, and fully aligned with the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence. So a strong pre-use review process doesn't have to be complicated, but it should be thorough. So this might mean including check-ins with industry experts or employers to confirm the content reflects current workplace practice, and moderating the tools with other trainers and assessors to test for clarity, fairness, and reliability. I don't know, maybe you can also trial the new tools with a small group of learners who represent your target cohort. This is a great way to spot issues before they become problems. Most importantly, document everything. Keep clear record of what was reviewed, who was involved, and what feedback was received. And of course, any updates that you've made. This evidence not only shows compliance, but it shows a commitment to quality and continuous improvement. So when it comes to reviewing our assessment tools, not everything carries the same level of risk. And that's exactly why we need to use a risk-based approach. For example, units with large student numbers, it's a new qualification, or it's got complex practical tasks. They should always be reviewed early and more often. They can carry higher compliance and quality risks. Lower risk tools, the ones that are stable, familiar, and have been performing well, can stay on that regular validation cycle. As long as you're still checking your feedback, you're moderating those outcomes and any changes to the training package. The main idea is to focus your effort where it really matters. That's how you keep your assessment system strong, current, and compliant without creating unnecessary admin work. Okay, so here's a big one now. Purchase assessment tools. Look, they're common in the vet sector. They can save us heaps of time. But ASQA is very clear that they shouldn't be just used straight out of the box. Under the standards, RTOs need to contextualise any off-the-shelf tools so they properly fit their delivery, their learner cohort, and their industry context. So that means taking time to make those tools your own. And so when I say making purchase assessment tools your own, it's really important to be clear about what that means. It doesn't mean just changing the logos, the colours, or formatting so it matches your RTO style guide. That's branding, not contextualisation. Contextualisation goes much deeper than that. It's about making sure the content of the tool actually fits your delivery, your learners, and your industry. So that means checking whether the language makes sense for your cohort, whether the scenarios fit in local workplaces, and whether the benchmarks align with the way that work is being done right now. You know, if you're training property agents, for example, your case study should refer to current legislation, current state-based legislation, not generic policy that might have come from 5 years ago. If you're in construction, your practical tasks should reflect the equipment, the codes, and the materials your learners actually use on site. So yes, you can update the logo, tidy up the layout, but real contextualisation is about quality and relevance, not just cosmetics. So when we're talking about this contextualisation, it's about shaping the tool to what your learners complete, so that when your learners complete it, it genuinely reflects what they'll face in the real world. And when ASQA looks at it, they can see that it is fit for purpose. So contextualisation might involve tweaking scenarios and terminology to reflect the right industry or region, updating performance benchmarks to align with current equipment or standards, or adding local workplace policies and compliance requirements. It also means checking the language, the literacy, and the numeracy and digital demands so that they are suitable also for your learners. And all of this should be formally recorded and approved before the tools are used. That way the RTO can clearly show that it has reviewed, adapted, and validated the tools to ensure that they truly are fit for purpose and not just off the shelf. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the things that can go wrong when we use purchase assessment tools without properly contextualising them. So first we can have a misalignment with the training product. So generic tools don't often match the current unit of competence. They might miss performance criteria or include knowledge questions that aren't really required. If tasks don't align with the unit, the assessment decision simply isn't valid or defensible, no matter how tidy all your paperwork looks. The next thing is that it could have irrelevant or outdated workplace contexts. Many off-the-shelf tools include examples of policies that are years out of date. Assessing learners against those outdated examples immediately undermines the credibility of the result. As we said earlier, inappropriate LLMD demands. If the tool hasn't been adapted for your learners, it might use language or literacy or numeracy that is too complex, or digital tasks don't reflect their real workplace reality. And that's unfair to learners, and it breaches those principles of fairness under the standards. Next, we can have inconsistent assessor judgments. Without clear localised benchmarks, different assessors can interpret the same task in completely different ways, and that leads to unreliable and inconsistent results. It's a red flag for ASQA and for quality assurance. We might not have any evidence of review or approval. So during audit, ASPR expects to see proof that each tool was reviewed and approved before use. So if there's no record, no contextualisation or no sign-off, it's assumed that the standard hasn't met, it's assumed that the RTO hasn't met standard 1.3. And of course, finally, reputational and regulatory consequences. Unmodified tools can lead to audit findings, rectification notices, or even suspension in serious cases. They also damage the RTO's reputation with industry, who expect that assessments reflect current real-world practice. So the message is really clear here. Contextualisation isn't just good practice, it's essential for the protection of your RTO's quality, credibility, and compliance. Okay. So when you're reviewing an assessment tool or an instrument, whichever one we want to call it, it's I've got a bit of a quick self-check to make sure that it's ready and to go and fully compliant. So you can ask yourself, have all of the tasks been mapped properly? Each question activity should link clearly to the elements, performance criteria, etc. Were the tools reviewed and approved before use? And so that's why we want to make sure that this sign-off step is important. It shows that the tools have been checked for quality and not just created and used straight away. We want to make sure that it reflects current workplace practice and equipment. Make sure the tasks and examples feel real and up to date with how industry actually operates. We're going to ensure that it's been contextualised. So ask yourself, has it been contextualised for your learner cohort and for the delivery mode? And otherwise, does it make sense for your student? Whether they're apprentices, online learners, or experienced workers. And that industry consultation and review documents or review outcomes have been documented. Don't just have the conversation. Record who you spoke to, what the feedback they gave, and what changes you made. And lastly, we need to think about, is the version control current and consistent across all tools? Everyone should be using the same version. Outdated tools are one of the biggest causes of non-compliance. So if you can tick yes to each of these, then your tools are in good shape. They're current, they're contextualised, and they're fit for purpose. So, as I mentioned earlier, Standard 1.3 requires that your assessment system to be generally designed to measure what it claims to do and does so in a way that's consistent with the training product. So we need to keep that in our minds the whole time that we're working with our assessments. When you're putting together an assessment tool, it's really important that every assessment task connects back to the unit. I can't stress this enough. When I'm teaching in the TAE, one of the things that I focus on with my learners is you need to know your unit of competence. You need to know that your assessment questions, your practical activities, your simulations, all link to the elements, the performance criteria, and the required knowledge. We need to make sure that it shows that what you're assessing is actually what the unit is asking for. You also want to make sure about those assessment conditions, make sure that you're real and relevant, and try to reflect what actually happens in the workplace, not some ideal or perfect version of it. Learners should be able to see the connection between what they're doing and what they face on the job. And make sure you can show that the tools have been tailored for that group. Everything needs to be reviewed before it's used. The documentation should clearly show when the tool was reviewed, who reviewed it, any industry feedback if it's relevant, and what changes were made before it was used. And of course, the version number is recorded somewhere in a log, your continuous improvement log. This helps demonstrate that your assessment tools are current, reviewed, and ready for use. So we need to maintain our assessment system integrity. And so this is all about keeping things consistent once the system is up and running. Because even the best designed assessment systems can fall apart if people use it differently or apply their own interpretations. So to keep everything on track, assessors, trainers, compliance staff all need to follow the same processes and share the same expectations. So we need to think about how that consistency can be supported. So, like having some clear decision-making rules or benchmarks, running regular moderation sessions to talk through tricky or borderline cases, and using detailed marking guides that reduce subjectivity. Internal audits or random sampling of assessment evidence can help pick up inconsistencies early. And technology, such as your learning management systems, can make it easier to control versioning, to store those records securely, and to keep everyone working from the same current document. Consistency is not about control, it's about confidence. When everyone's on the same page, the assessment system holds up and the results are reliable. My clicker's been a bit naughty here. Okay, so keeping your assessment system current is essential because even the best designed tools can become outdated as training products or industry practices evolve. So whenever a training package changes or where there's a major shift in workplace processes, equipment or regulation, your assessment material needs to be reviewed and updated. So regular currency checks make this easier. So that means keeping an eye on training.gov for any updates to the qualifications or the units, and checking in with industry partners to stay across new trends in technology, and recording any updates in our assessment tool register. Outdated or unchecked tools are a big risk to assessment validity. They can make competent learners look unskilled, or vice versa. Regular reviews not only reduce the risk, but also show that the RTO is serious about maintaining compliance, industry relevance in their assessment systems. So building smarter systems isn't a one-off job. It's something that evolves and improves over time. A great way for RTOs to manage this is through a continuous improvement cycle, where assessment systems are regularly reviewed, tested and refined. You know the cycle, the plan, the do, the check and the act. So we want to set clear goals and indicators for assessment quality. Put the assessment tools and processes into action and support trainers or support assessors with training and assessment. Review things how are going through feedback, moderation, validation, and internal audits. Make improvements based on what you've learned and document those changes. So by following this cycle, it helps show that the RTO assessment system isn't static. It's actively managed, quality checked, and continuously improved to stay current and effective. Okay, so let's just recap about Standard 1.3. High quality assessment systems does exactly what it says on that label. It measures what matters. It's the kind of system that actually measures the performance outcomes set in the training product. No more, no less. Gives learners the chance to show what they can do in contexts that actually resemble the real work. Nobody works in a simulated environment, do they? Keep things fair, flexible, valid and reliable across assessors, cohorts and campuses. And most importantly, it builds in improvement through ongoing feedback, through moderation and validation. Assessment quality isn't set and forget. So quality assessment, we've looked at the assessment systems. Now let's look at our actual assessments. So a quality assessment is the heartbeat of vocational training. It's how we prove that learners can actually do the job, just not talk about it. So under that, the standards for RTOs, every assessment must be fit for purpose, aligned with the training product, and built on the principles of assessment and rules of evidence. So put simply, assessments need to be realistic, consistent, and this word defensible. You need to be able to defend what you're doing. So in this next section, we're going to look at what that means in practice, what good assessment looks like, and how to avoid traps that can trip up RTOs. So as we looked at fit for purpose assessment practices, we're now going to look at the actual assessment instruments. So a fit for purpose assessment means every task actually measures what it's meant to do. Real skills, knowledge, performance outcomes set in the training product. It's not about guessing what the unit requires or recycling old tasks. It's about making sure each activity generally reflects the work people do in industry today. When assessment is fit for purpose, it feels authentic, it's relevant, and it's fair. Not like some box ticking exercise dreamed up in a meeting room. So to keep assessments truly fit for purpose, the design needs to line up directly with the unit of competence. A knowledge question should test the specific underpinning knowledge that unit calls for, not a vague, what do you think kind of understanding. Practical tasks should mirror real workplace conditions and give learners a genuine chance to show every required performance criterion. And your supporting documents, your checklists, your observation forms, your marking tools, etc., they should make those links crystal clear. If you can't see the connection, neither will ASQA. Let me tell you, ASQA is really focusing in on this in their audits. So, to prove your assessment is fit for purpose, your RTO needs to show that it's been built for the real world, not just written for an audit file. So that means that you actually need to review and contextualize your tools for each learner group and delivery mode. One size never fits all. As we keep saying, check in with industry. Make sure your assessment reflects current practice, not how things were done a decade ago. Balance theory and practice, so learners can both explain and apply their skills, and keep evidence that every tool was reviewed before use, tweaked when needed. And so, I don't know, here's an example. A building and construction RTO is delivering supervised site communication. So they might talk to the site managers and update its observation tasks so that it matches how real digital project management systems are used now, not the old dusty paper forms that we used back in, I don't know, 2005. A good quality assessment system has a few checks and balances in it to keep things valid and reliable. So that might mean using standardized tools and assessor guides, which have clear benchmarks for practical tasks. Holding moderation sessions and running regular validation activities. It also means making sure as assessors get proper induction and ongoing professional development so that everybody is up to date and confident in their role. So consistency really comes down to having a shared understanding of what competence actually looks like. And the best way to build that is through collaboration. Things like peer moderation, mentoring, and reviewing evidence samples together. It's about assessors learning from each other and keeping those judgments aligned. So this is where outcome standard 1.4 comes in. It's really about the quality and the consistency of the assessment. It focuses on making sure every assessment is fair, valid, reliable, and consistent, and that the evidence we collect is authentic, sufficient, current, and relevant. So, in other words, it's about ensuring that every assessment decision your RTO makes is credible, transparent, and defensible, no matter who conducts it, where it's delivered, or which learners are involved. And ASQA's expectations here is very clear. Your assessment systems and assessor practices must apply the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence. And they must do so consistently across every unit, every cohort, every delivery mode. I was in a PD session on assessment recently, and session made a really good point. The principles of assessment and rules of evidence used to be something we were expected to follow. But now, under the new standards, they've been elevated to a standard all of their own. So it highlights how important they are in ensuring quality, fairness, and consistency across your RTO. So this means, I don't know, how we go about this. The assessment system needs to keep us honest. It's there to make sure assessment isn't just paperwork, but genuine measure of what learners can do out there in the real world. So for the RTO, that means living and breathing the principles of assessment, that fairness, that flexibility, that validity, and the reliability. Every learner deserves a fair chance in assessment. And, like our assessment should be able to bend a little bit, but definitely not break. So it needs to be that we fit our different contexts, that the tasks are measured to do the right things, and assessors are all singing from the same song sheet. So when it comes to judging that evidence. And then there's the rules of evidence. That's the quality control of assessment. The evidence has to be on target. There has to be enough of it, and it has to be the learner's own work. And it needs to reflect their current skills. When the RTO gets these bits right, assessment becomes more than compliance. It becomes credible, consistent, and generally reflective of real competence. So when we're looking at these principles of assessment, we're looking at fairness. So fairness is about giving every learner a fair go. They should know what's expected of them and have a real chance to show what they can do. Now, this might include some reasonable adjustment where appropriate and allowing reassessment when necessary. Flexibility means allowing for different ways of collecting evidence, such as observation, written tasks, or recognition of prior learning. It also means we can adjust how assessment happens to suit the learner's needs or context, as long as we're still assessing the same outcomes and the integrity of the unit is maintained. Validity is making sure we're actually assessing what we're saying we're assessing. Gather evidence that truly reflects the learner's ability to perform the tasks required by the competency. If the unit is about communication skills, for example, the tasks need to give the learners a chance to demonstrate those skills, not something unrelated. And reliability, assessors apply the same standards every time, so that the results are consistent and repeatable. Moderation processes should be in place to ensure assessors apply the same criteria and standards when evaluating evidence. So when we're looking at fairness and flexibility, they actually go hand in hand when it comes to quality assessment. It's about giving learners a fair chance to show what they can do while still maintaining the same competency standard for everyone. And so that's where reasonable adjustment comes in. It's a way to remove barriers without lowering the bar. For example, you might allow oral questioning instead of written answers. Give some extra time to learners with language or literacy needs, or use assistive technology, or even have an interpreter if required. The key thing is that the adjustment should never water down the standard or skip any of the essential parts of the task. And whenever an adjustment is made, an assessor should be able to show why it was done and what they did. That keeps the process fair, transparent, and defensible. A reasonable adjustment can take many forms depending on the learner's needs. We can offer our materials in different formats. We can change how the learner demonstrates their skills. Maybe we could do a video recording or a verbal explanation, or even an observation in the workplace instead of a written report. And sometimes it's just about adjusting the environment, providing a quieter space or extra time, or scheduling the assessments on a different time of day. We could also maybe give some rest breaks for learners with any medical or concentration-related needs. We can also provide extra support, a reader, a scribe, an interpreter where possible, where appropriate. And so for some learners, it's about simplifying the instructions, using plain English, or adding some visuals to make expectations clearer. For learners from diverse or cultural or linguistic backgrounds, we might need to adapt examples or case studies to make them more culturally relevant, while still assessing the same skills and knowledge. And in some cases, maybe we can offer some short preparatory sessions so learners understand the process and feel confident before starting the assessment. The key point is reasonable adjustment helps us to remove unnecessary barriers, but the standard of competence is always the same. The learner still needs to demonstrate that they can meet requirements, which is giving them an equitable pathway to do so. What's not reasonable? Reasonable adjustment should never change the standard of performance required by that unit of competence, or remove essential components of the task that demonstrate competence. For example, if a unit requires a learner to safely operate a piece of machinery, the assessment cannot be replaced with a written description of how to do it. The learner must still demonstrate the skills safely and competently. When you make reasonable adjustments, record it properly, not just for compliance, but for fairness and transparency. Every adjustment should be discussed and agreed with the learner beforehand. It needs to be recorded in their assessment file, noting what was done and why. And it should be approved by the RTO, so that we're working with our reasonable adjustment or accessibility policy. So we need to just remember that reasonable adjustment is about equity, not about lowering the bar. It helps learners show what they can really do while keeping the integrity of the assessment intact. Okay, rules of evidence. We need to move on. Validity means the evidence clearly relates to what's being assessed. It should show that the learner can perform the tasks described in the unit and meet the required standards. Sufficiency means that there's enough evidence to make confident judgments. Assessors need to see that the learner can perform consistently across different situations. Authenticity means that the work is the learner's own. Assessors must be sure that evidence hasn't come from someone else. And currency means the Evidence reflects what learners can do now, not what they did years ago. So a valid assessment is making it real, that it mirrors actual conditions and challenges of the workplace, so that the learners get a chance to show what they can really do, not just what they can remember. There are lots of ways to make assessment more authentic, like using workplace-based tasks or projects that reflect the real industry needs, building scenarios or case studies with input from employers, and recreating real-world factors like time pressures or work health and safety conditions, or even collecting verified third-party evidence from supervisors. We need to confirm genuine components. I'm sorry, I think I skipped 2 slides there. Just let me go back one. My clicker is being very naughty. Okay. We're back on track. Okay. So the whole point of this standard is to make sure that when we say someone is competent, they can really perform what the workplace standard says. We need to protect the integrity of the qualification. So, we want to make sure that when these people come out of our training, when they've done their assessment, that they actually can do the work in the real life. We want to protect that integrity of our assessment system. We want to promote consistency between our assessors. And finally, we want to provide evidence that stands up to scrutiny. Assessors must be able to base every decision on evidence that meets the rules of evidence, and that it's valid, sufficient, authentic, and current. So let's talk about the rule of sufficiency, one of the areas where RTOs often struggle. Sufficiency doesn't mean sufficiency means collecting enough evidence to make a confident, well-informed judgment. It's not about collecting more evidence. It's about collecting the right amount and the right range of evidence to show that a learner can perform the required task. If there's too little evidence, you can't be sure that the learner is truly competent. If there's too much, the process becomes inefficient, inconsistent, and overwhelming, not just for the learner, but for the assessor as well. So we need to find that balance, ensuring that evidence gives complete coverage of the unit without unnecessary duplication. So sufficient evidence basically comes down to making sure that we've covered all parts of that unit of competence, that we are showing both knowledge and application, that the learner can not only perform the task correctly, but they understand why and how it's done. And so this could be supported by corroborating evidence, such as observation records, questioning, product samples, and even verified third-party reports. When those pieces come together, the assessor can be confident that decisions are reliable, defensible. So how do we go about doing this? We can use a mix of assessment methods: observation, questioning, third-party reports. We can make sure that every task is properly mapped to that unit of competence. That way nothing's missed, and you can clearly show how each activity links to that performance. And we need to collect evidence from different occasions or contexts where possible. So this just shows that that learner hasn't done a one-off, they've fluked it. So we need to be able to show that all of this evidence comes together, and we can review this by moderation and validation. And we can keep clear records of how each piece of evidence contributed to the assessment decision. So here's the big one, the rule of authenticity. It's all about making sure evidence we assess is genuinely the learner's own work. Now, as an assessor, we need to be confident that what's submitted truly reflects the learner's skills and knowledge, and not something that's being prepared by a colleague, a friend, an online source, or that fabulous AI tool. Authenticity is vital for maintaining the integrity and credibility of our assessment outcomes. So if we can't verify that that learner produced that evidence, then the assessment decision just isn't valid or defensible. And why does it matter so much? Well, authentic evidence builds trust. It builds trust in the learner's results, in our assessments, and in our RTO's reputation. And when authenticity is compromised, whether it's copying, unauthorized collaboration, whatever it is, it puts the credibility of our system in, there's a big question mark. ASQA treats authenticity as a core part of Standard 1.4 because it shows that qualifications generally reflect competence and achieved under a quality assured system where every learner has earned their result honestly. And we know that, out there are RTOs who are being looked at for this. So what are we looking for? We're looking for plagiarism. When a learner copies text, images, or ideas from another source without acknowledging it. It might come from a website, a sample answer, or even another learner's submission. And then there's collusion. So this is where two or more learners get together and they work on an individual task and hand in work that is the same or very similar. So I believe collaboration is fine when it's part of an activity, but when an individual task, it still must show how each learner's own effort and understanding went towards creating that outcome. We also need to watch out for contract cheating. So this is where someone pays or asks another person to complete that assessment on their behalf. Now, it's more common than we think. There's so many programs out there where you can actually ask people to do your assessment. It completely undermines the credibility of the result. Another issue is misrepresentation. Things like submitting photos, videos, or third-party reports that weren't produced by the learner, or that have been altered or reused from somebody else's work. And finally, our growing challenge, AI-generated content. If learners submit work that is produced entirely by artificial intelligence without disclosure or without adding their own genuine input, the work can't be considered authentic evidence. So we need to make sure that the evidence we assess is authentic. So maybe a way that we can try to eliminate some of these issues is by using direct observation, watching the learner complete the task or demonstrating it in real time. Nothing confirms authenticity than by seeing it yourself. Questioning is another strong tool. Ask the learner to explain what they did and why. If they can clearly talk through the process, then it's a good sign that the work was their own. Look, we can use signed declarations with each submission. We can ask for third-party supervisors' reports. We can also do things like compare writing styles or performance across different tasks. That sudden change in ability could show that, the learner hasn't done all of that work themselves. And for written tasks, we can use our plagiarism or AI detection tools to help flag those issues. We could also have things like unique logins or timestamped uploads that provide a secure record of who submitted what and when. So together, these strategies protect the credibility of the assessment by ensuring that every piece of evidence belongs to that learner. So I think this is all about we need to have a better way to inform our learners about academic integrity and assessment misconduct. And so our policies should explain how cheating and plagiarism are identified, investigated and managed. And look, if you suspect misconduct, you need to follow a fair and consistent process. Gather the evidence. This could be matching the text, duplicate files or inconsistencies. Give the learner an opportunity to respond or explain. Sometimes there's a genuine misunderstanding, so it's important to hear their side. And then record the outcome in line with your policy, your RTO's policy. So you might need to arrange for retraining, reassessment, or there might be other corrective actions. Depending on how serious the case is, penalties might include resubmitting the work, being reassessed under supervision, or in severe cases, disciplinary action. But the main goal should always be this education and prevention, helping learners understand what plagiarism is and how to reference correctly and how to produce authentic work with integrity. So we need to support learners so that they can understand about promoting authenticity from the start. So at induction, we should explain what authenticity means and why it matters. And that learners have to demonstrate their own skills. We could provide guidance on referencing and paraphrasing and acknowledging the source so learners know how to use that information ethically. And maybe we could change the way that our assessments are structured. So it does make them harder to outsource or to copy. So encourage learners to talk about their work, explain their reasoning. I think the key takeaway to this is authenticity confirms that the evidence truly belongs to the learner and reflects their real ability. Cheating or plagiarism doesn't just damage the learner's credibility, it's a risk to the RTO's compliance and reputation. So we have our practice guides and ASQA gives them to us to help us think about what to do. So they're not checklists that every RTO must complete line by line, but there are examples of activities that may demonstrate compliance with the standards. The examples aren't exhaustive, and then not all of them will apply to every organisation. But what matters is applying them in ways that make sense for your RTO's context, your size, your scale, and your student cohorts. So use them to guide your reflection. So if we were to put a practice guide into plain English, it's about the clarity and communication. So you can see here that this practice guide says it's about demonstrating how you go about providing clear guidance. We need to make sure that both the assessor and the student have clearly understandable resources that help them know what's being assessed, what the conditions are, and how the process will unfold. So clear task instructions, outlining when and where the assessment will take place, explaining how the performance will be judged. When everyone has that same understanding, then assessments are far more consistent and they're transparent and they're fair. So we know that even the best designed assessment systems can fall short of the standards and not be compliant, especially with these principles of assessment and rules of evidence. So RTOs need to monitor where and how these risks might occur and take proactive steps to control them, and then record the actions taken through validation, moderation, and continuous improvement. So if things go wrong, sometimes there's just these common culprits. The tools might not reflect the real workplace or suit the student cohort. Assessors might not be able to confirm confirm that the learner actually produced the evidence themselves, or practical tasks just aren't demonstrated clearly enough. And then there's the issue of these different assessors interpreting the standards in different ways. Sometimes the evidence is incomplete, misplaced, or even lost altogether. All of these things can undermine the credibility of the assessment process. So that's why you need to have these good assessment systems and clear communication. So there are a few things that you can do, and one of the big ones is, so let me go back and start that again. There are a few things that can really undermine the integrity of the assessment. And this is even when good intentions are there. One of the big ones is making adjustments for students that go too far. Adjustments should help the learner demonstrate competence, not lower the bar. We also need to make sure that we're reviewing those mandated tools for licensed outcomes so that we can actually keep up with those current industry requirements. Another issue is assessing students in groups where it's hard to tell what each person has actually contributed. Everyone needs a fair chance to show their own competence. The same goes for work placements. If the qualification requires direct observation in the workplace, it has to happen. Consistency can also fall apart if there aren't proper systems to keep assessors aligned, or if people who aren't qualified are making assessment judgments, those people who are working under supervision. Other risks might be weak governance around academic integrity, using those overly generic tick box checklists instead of recording real performance. And finally, not checking who actually completed the assessment or failing to review your assessment systems after each cohort means missed opportunities. A quality RTO learns from every round of assessment and keeps strengthening their approach. So best practice, first, let's not have generic off-the-shelf tools that haven't been contextualised. Let's make sure that we review and contextualise every tool before each delivery. Make sure that we have sufficient authenticity checks. If the assessor can't confirm the learner actually produced that evidence, then let's do something about it. We could use our verification methods like our ID checks, our supervisor sign-off. And third, there's over-reliance on written tasks. This happens when assessments rely too heavily on theory and don't give learners a chance to demonstrate their skills. We need to fix this by using direct observation and workplace projects. Now, I know I've gone over time here a little bit. I've got a couple more things to do and we'll be done. Inconsistent assessor decisions. Let's keep this under wraps by doing moderation and benchmarking. And of course, our record keeping. We must keep good records, keep documentation of everything we do, and keep them in a secure place, in our LMS, in our student management systems, whatever we're using. If we can control these simple risks, then we're really on our way to have strong, defensible and compliant assessment practices. We need to think about self-assurance, and self-assurance is just a fancy way of saying we can prove our own quality any day of the week. Review regularly, spot risks early, listen to the feedback, and document what you do and what changes as a result. So for trainers and assessors, what does this mean? In short, you're not just part of the quality system, you are the quality system. You've got to apply those principles of assessment. You've got to make sure your evidence meets the rules and that we play an active part in moderation and validation. Also, we need to be aware that our RTO leadership team also has a job in making sure assessors are supported and not swamped with clear policies, consistent templates, and meaningful professional development. So, here's the wrap up. The message is clear. Assessment under the standards for RTO 2025 isn't about ticking boxes. It's about demonstrating quality. Every assessment we design, deliver, and review should be clearly show that learners are competent and that our tools reflect real work and that our support systems, that they're fair, they're consistent, and they have integrity. If we can show that our assessments are set fit for purpose, they're current and defensible, we're not just meeting compliance, we're providing or we're proving quality in action. And that's what ASQA wants to see. That's what industry expects. And that's what builds confidence in every qualification we issue. So thank you for joining us today. As I said, it was a big topic. I'm glad I didn't try to put anything else in there. We appreciate your time, and I hope you found this session valuable. We have one more PD for this year, so please look out for that. And as I said, your certificates won't be available until tomorrow, but they'll definitely be there, and you'll be able to download all of the assessment, all the information that I've talked about. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll sign off now.